You're listening to the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm Allison Law. It's the month of May, the month of flowers overflowing cut glass faces, heartfelt words and borrowed quotes sheathed inside cardstock and vellum, party dresses, crisp khakis, and caps and gowns, giving way to t-shirts, shorts, and swimsuits. I hope you and yours are enjoying a month abundant with celebrations of mothers and graduates and other family milestones. I can't think of a better way to ease back into the podcast than to share one of the best books I've read in the past year that examines family relationships and how we forge our own identities inside these clans that we're born into. The book is The Distance Home, and it's just come out in paperback. My conversation with its author, Paula Saunders, is straight ahead on episode 58 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Paula Saunders grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota. She is a graduate of the Syracuse University Creative Writing Program and was awarded a postgraduate Albert Schweitzer Fellowship at the State University of New York at Albany. The chair of the program at that time was none other than Toni Morrison. Paula lives in California with her husband, the Booker Prize-winning author George Saunders. They have 2 grown daughters. One of Paula's daughters was in the audience back in November when we recorded the following interview at Writers at the Wrecking Bar. As you'll hear, Paula praises her daughter as one of the many editors who helped midwife The Distance Home, a debut novel that was more than 30 years in the making. This book, as I understand it, you began writing some 30 years ago when you were in the creative writing program at Syracuse University, at least pieces of it?
Yes, that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, I started writing these stories because these are kind of my family stories and the stories I've carried with me, and this just happens to be my material. I'm not a very inventive, I don't have a very inventive imagination, but I have a mind that really likes to look into relationship and family, and so these are the stories I've carried with me. So some of these similar incidents were written about in graduate school. As a matter of fact, our teacher Tobias Wolf was over at our house to have dinner, and he said, I recognize some of these stories from workshop.
Wow.
So, and that was, I think, my friend from graduate school, Kath, is here, and that was maybe 32 years ago. So it's a long time ago, but in the meantime, I wrote this material as a novel, as a book of short stories, as I just kept going back and back and back to it.
That's what I was so interested in, because that seems like such a daunting task to me, to go back to this material when you've lived a very full life in between. So what was it that appealed to you about writing about this, the writer that you were when you were in graduate school, and then picking it up now and putting it out there as your debut novel, the writer that you are now?
I think as a young writer, I was very interested in looking into my family for questions about the world we live in. I mean, I think that was really what I was interested in, and how we're affected by our families. And I felt like as a young writer, I might have had some of the technical skills to go forward with it, but I didn't really have the emotional skills to go forward with the book in the way that it needed to be, I think. So it took that whole lifetime, kind of having my own family, seeing my parents age and pass away, and all that goes with that, all of the maturation and understanding that comes along with that. It took all of that, I think. And when I started to go back to it after my kids had grown up and gone away, and I thought maybe I could try this again, my husband brought some manuscripts up from the basement because I don't store any manuscripts, I throw them away, but he stores them for me. So he brought up this box and he said, here they are. I said, no, I don't want to see any of it. I don't want to look at any of the work I've done on this.
Really? Why?
To date. I wanted to start fresh.
Ah.
I really wanted to start fresh. That was really important to me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, it seems, other novelists have told me that when you're working on your first piece, that sometimes it becomes so close to reality and to your real life that it either the book suffers and it's not necessarily their best work, or they suffer when they think about exposing themselves and the people and places and things that are in the book that are not as fictionalized as they should be. And so they just kind of put it under the bed and hope nobody ever reads it. Did you feel like you were too close to this material? Because there are a lot of similarities between your life and your family growing up and the characters that are in The Distance Home.
I think maybe I did feel very close to it, which is why I waited. I mean, there is an element in here of waiting until my parents had passed away to approach this material, to have the freedom to approach this material in the way that I wanted. There's definitely an element of that. But it seemed to me that the experiences I had in my family spoke to us. It seemed to me that it spoke to us as a culture. Because you could see in my family these kind of quiet, I call them violences, the quiet violence of preference, the quiet violence of language. Those kinds of things I think are really important, and as far as I can see, that's how we get, because you always wonder, how do we get to where we are right now? How did we get here? And to me, these are the seeds of that. These are the seeds that allow us to get to where we are right now, because we become inured or immune or inundated with these constant kind of small violences in our culture that are acceptable, that we don't really think about. We do blindly, we do them unconsciously, we commit them against each other almost like continuously. So that to me was really interesting. So it didn't feel too close in that way. It felt like I was trying to move away from that core idea into something larger that I really wanted to express. So in that way, the material didn't feel too close. It felt important to me.
I think you do tap into a universality of family and the different family dynamics in this that we can all appreciate and understand. So let's talk about the family that's central to this story. And this is in the 1960s when we kind of get to Eve and Al's story. And I guess we should also say that this is set in your home, your native South Dakota.
Right.
And so that plays a big part, the setting plays a big part in The Distance Home. And Eve has, I like to consider myself a type A personality, very driven and ambitious. But she and then her daughter Renee really put me to shame. Will you talk a little bit about Eve and her ambitions and how that kind of starts off in the beginning of the book?
Sure. Eve is the mother and the wife, and she is from a family of 7 children, and they have, they're very poor. And she has 2 brothers who die early in her life, which kind of pushes her into this marriage with her husband, Al, who is a second-generation cattle trader in South Dakota. So that means he's on the road all of the time. So what she wants as a person growing up is she wants more out of her life than she sees around her. And she knows it's going to take a lot of her inner strength to get those things that she wants. So to me, then there's her daughter, Renee, who's very driven and kind of aggressive and is in the same boat. Even though, you know how it is generationally, your mother and your parents have taken a step up or a step to a different place and where they want to be. But then as a child in that family, the children in that family, you may also want to search for kind of bigger horizons for yourself. And they both have that kind of drive. So I see them, like you said, as very, very similar.
I think they're so much alike, and for that reason, I think that is a very volatile relationship.
Yeah.
They have a really hard time getting along, and that is a recurring theme throughout the book.
Yeah, they do, and yet it's that same quality, the quality that leads them to fight, and the quality that is the quality that leads them to excel. Mm-hmm. You know, they're both very kind of strong-headed and strong, actually. Mm-hmm. So.
And I like what you were saying before about the small violences, and I think one of the ones that you mentioned was the violence of preference. Mm-hmm. Will you tell me, are you talking about like the preference, because it seems like it's very clear in this book that Eve has a preference for her son, Leon. Mm-hmm. She tends to dote on him. And the opposite, it's Al and Renee in this book. Mm-hmm. Are you referring to that when you say violence of preference?
I am, actually. Okay. I am. It's the grandmother, Emma, and the father, Al, have an overtly demonstrated preference for the middle daughter, Renee. And it seems to me, I call it a retaliatory preference. Mm. But it also is a little bit of a saving, a supporting preference. Eve comes up with this kind of supporting or retaliatory preference for her son, who is, you know, in very shaky ground with his father and grandmother a lot of the time. So that seems to me a kind of natural dynamic in a family. But it's definitely one that's in the book. And it does create almost a violence that has to be responded to. But now you see in the book, it's responded to with another violence. Mm. So instead of being addressed as something clear that you could say, you know, hey, Al, hey, Emma, Grandma, we need to talk about how you're addressing these two children. Instead of it being addressed through the adults, it's addressed as a kind of subterfuge in another violent way through an aggression towards the daughter, Renee.
Yeah, well, we in the southern region of the United States like to think that we patented passive aggression, but if I'm reading this book correctly, we don't have that all to ourselves there.
No.
Okay.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it is interesting that we operate sometimes as families. We're supposed to be the closest people to each other, and then there's a lot that we don't say, that we just let it go. And there are these small violences, but there are some overt violences in the book. This is an abusive home. So do you want to talk about kind of the progression of how things are going, specifically with Leon? It feels very fated that because there is this distance between Al and Leon, it shows up later in the book as bipolar and has substance abuse issues. He just has a hard time being a part of society, especially that society where I keep talking for her. Just get to the question so we can listen to her talk. I'm sorry, Paula. But it just seems like poor Leon. I feel the whole book, your heart breaks for him so many times because he's in the situation where he can't win.
He's definitely in a situation where he can't win. That's for sure. And a lot of that has to do with the relationship between the father, him and his father, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of it also has to do with the relationship between the father and the mother. A lot of that has to do with that. So, you know, there's this playing, you know, this is maybe more typical in a family than you'd like to think, but playing the children off of each other and using them as pawns in your marital quarrels. So the time when the violence kind of breaks through from being kind of these quiet violences or these small violences to being an overt violence of Al really attacking or brutalizing Leon is when Al is so frustrated by his work and his wife. And he's been humiliated by his wife in front of a therapist. She finally talks him into going to the therapist, and Al is humiliated in front of this therapist, or feels humiliated in front of this therapist. And so then what happens then? It turns, it goes a different direction, but the violence keeps moving through the family.
Mm-hmm. And I should mention there's a third sibling, Jane.
There is.
Who's the three children have three very different coping mechanisms of dealing, they're very attuned to what's happening between their mother and their father, and they have different ways of dealing with that. Do you want to talk about the ways that, like Leon and the hair pulling and?
Well, I think that it takes a lot of energy to be in a family like that, because you have to always be tuned into the nuances. You can't let something small go. You have to watch. And as a child, that's very, very taxing. And so, like, if you're someone like Leon, who's very sensitive and shy and kind of a stutterer, very tender-hearted and always concerned with others ahead of himself, he has those incredibly beautiful natural qualities that everybody kind of would like to have. But these qualities on the Great Plains at the time and in that particular family of cattle traders and hard workers are not, they're not elevated qualities. They're not qualities that, people really admire. They admire kind of a strength and a toughness. And to me, this gets back to the ideal of America.
Okay.
As Americans, we value power. We value strength. We value money. We value winning. Look where we are right now. We value winning over everything. So when you have a child who's soft, a male child especially, because we have this gender confusion, all of us, this male child especially, who's very tender and very tender-hearted, then I think as an American parent, you kind of feel like, what's the matter with my son? What am I going to do about this? He's got to get stronger. He's got to get tougher. There's no way in our culture to move if you're a tender-hearted, truly tender-hearted person, because the likelihood is you'll lose. Someone else will move ahead of you. And I think that's really, I don't know if I got off track, but that's really important to me in the book.
Yeah, I think the performativity of masculinity, of gender, is a big issue, is a big reason why Al and Leon don't seem to get along. And at the same time, I don't know if, when you said something about how the parents kind of use the children to play off of each other, I just started questioning, well, maybe that is part of the reason that Eve then enrolls Leon in ballet classes. I mean, I think part of it was that she was leaning into his natural tendencies and his tenderheartedness, and that he was awkward, but he had all of this energy. But at the same time, maybe she did have that motive. She knew it was going to really make Al crazy for her son to be in, for his son to be in a ballet class.
Yeah, I think all through the book there's that kind of aggression against each other as a married couple. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things that you can do. And then you see, then Leon and Renee are both in ballet, and you can see that Renee has the support of the family, enough support in her family to enact her deep aggressive tendencies, because she's very aggressive. As a person, that's her natural tendency. And it's rewarded.
Yeah.
Because it helps her to move forward, which is what we value. So.
Yes, and so at the time that it's not great that Leon is in ballet, Renee gets into ballet, and she's rewarded and she's praised for that as well. But thankfully, she does go into ballet, because we're introduced to one of my favorite characters in the book, Mrs. G, who leads the ballet academy in Rapid City. I think they're in Rapid City at this point in the book.
Yes, they are.
And dance was that's another similarity that you share with the characters in this book, that dance was a big part of your life?
It was a big part of my life, definitely. That was my goal, to be a ballet dancer. And I think that I left home when I was 15 to study ballet, and I didn't go home after that. I went to New York and danced as an apprentice with Harkness Ballet. And I think, one of the things that my parents always said to me was, well, this is your college education. So there was never any idea that I would go to college, ever. I would be a dancer, and that would be my life. And because, we're tradespeople. My father was a cattle trader, and you were supposed to get a job and work. And so that was going to be my work, whether it was dancing or teaching dance. And I did teach dance for quite a long time.
Wow. Well, so that's why there are all of the different poses and moves and everything in the book. And were you like Renee? You weren't able to just walk down the hall. You had to do the dance moves?
That was me, yes.
The family's confirming in the background there.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
So you still dance through the house? Oh, okay.
No. I haven't danced since I quit dancing.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, because this is the thing that I was thinking about on the way over here too, was that Eve was not your traditional stage mom. She had all of the kids participating in dance at this point, and she was kind of a partner to Mrs. G, who ran the dance studio and was doing all of the costumes. But I don't think she ever aspired to have her kids, Leon or Renee, go away and be dancers. She just wanted them to be the best no matter what. That was the thing that they never really were supposed to go away. That's how I felt about it. How did you feel about it? She wasn't expecting her to go away and be Baryshnikov, or Leon to be Baryshnikov. But at the same time, there was this sense of self. Like, she really encouraged Renee to do whatever she wanted to do, even if it made everybody around her angry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. Because I think when Renee finally did leave home, it wasn't that her mother wanted her to leave home, and it wasn't really that she wanted to leave home. But there was this recognized from earlier, as we were talking about before, this higher calling, this kind of like opportunity, this big opportunity to move out into the world in the way that both Eve, the mother, and Renee, the daughter, had always wanted to. So I think when Eve saw Renee get that opportunity, she didn't want her to turn it down. So.
And one of the side effects of all of this ambition and striving is a lot of isolation, which is at times made worse by the fact that they're in this very cold, snowy region, and talking about always anticipating the other shoe dropping. When they moved to the house and they had the porch that didn't have any railing and there was a 25-foot drop, I was like, oh no. I was just expecting something awful to happen on the porch. Because you do feel that tension every time the family is together, like, I hope he doesn't say something, or she doesn't, you're always kind of bracing for it. So back to the isolation. They're isolated by the fact, especially even Renee, that they're so driven to succeed and be the best at everything that everybody really hates them. I mean, they're just kind of sick, and they're like, that's okay with us.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this is one of the things that was really important to me in the book. I think that, in the way that we view things as a people, I think, this is a big statement, but I think that, there is kind of an idea that success is good, that winning is good, and that losing is bad. And I don't see that as necessarily true. It seems to me like if you have success under these particular rules, under these particular tenets, then you have also lost. Because there are people who suffer because of you. And I think that I hope that really comes across in the book. That, the winners don't win. That seems to me one of the basic ideas. The winners don't win. They lose as well. Because when you're basing your whole idea or ideology on the system of win and lose or any kind of dichotomy, if someone else loses, you have lost something. And that gets back, I think, to the isolation. You have lost something with the person who loses. And I hope that's a strong point in the book, because that's a really important point to me. Because I'm basing Renee on my own life. I never felt it never felt really like getting ahead was so great. Except on a superficial level where you have the benefits of getting ahead. But then you have to wish everyone's getting ahead. There's that section in there that said, I always wanted to say to Leon that he needed to fight, that he needed to get for himself what they wouldn't give him. Yeah. And no matter who it hurt or what was lost. And I really believe that for everyone. But that doesn't mean that those of us who are stronger can move ahead without consequences.
Mm-hmm. And you write beautifully in one section about Renee realizing that there is no freedom in success and being the best at all cost. Too, that she realized at one point in the book that there was no freedom in that, because it was never ending. It was always a constant.
Right, and that particular section I like very much, actually, and that particular section is layered also with that idea of accomplishment, because in that particular section it wasn't going to be about freedom. It wasn't going to be about freedom because she needed to learn the rules. She needed to perfect them. She needed to make them her own so that she could move ahead with her own rules. So that was also that, and also the idea of trying to take this situation we're in and manipulate it to yourself so that you can move with your own voice. That's a big order.
I was looking to see if that was one of the sections that I moved. I've kind of dog-eared all of the pages as I was reading through them, because there's so many pretty descriptions. The one that I did mark here, and I didn't know if you wanted to read from this, but this was in chapter 12 when you're talking about Renee. They had just moved, and Renee's she starts walking between school and home, and I thought it was just such a beautiful description of what her life was like in that landscape. And I put here on my little sticky note, opening peas at the seam. It just stuck with me. So I don't know if you wanted to read a little bit of that.
Sure.
When she would take off across.
Okay. Do you have it? Would you like me to read to the
sure.
section
I was
break?
just
Or just right here?
Yeah, right there, and then this paragraph up here.
This is from chapter 12. Chapter 12 is called Cheating Gravity. Renee would take off across their backyard for school, giving Chuck a pat as he milled in circles around the one big tree, then continue past the detached garage and rusty swing set. If the weather was just right, there'd be a million grasshoppers on the trail leading down to the neighbor's yard. She'd run screaming as they flew, latching onto her knee-highs or bare legs. But after that, the world would open into a wonderland. She'd walk Clark Street until it curved to trace the bottom of the hillside, then scrabble up a steep, crumbling sandstone embankment to keep from going around the long block, cut through backyards to reach the crest of the hill, and follow the lightly worn footpath that ran through the prairie scrub. She carried her books and notebooks, but she never hurried. She'd stop to pick a handful of sage and breathe the deep perfume, just standing, looking out at the sky. And if there was rhubarb growing wild or green peas hanging over someone's fence, she'd linger, peeling the thin skin off the rhubarb stalk and biting into the tart fruit, or opening the peas at the seam and tipping her head back to pop them into her mouth. She'd take a detour to avoid a barking dog, kicking away any loose stones, feeling her way forward like her ancestors, the pioneers.
Yeah, it's all right. I think that, yeah, that's definitely clap-worthy. You do feel a sense of being connected to the generations before you when you read about South Dakota and that place where you grew up in this book. Is that kind of what you remember about being there? And I mean, were you opening the peas at the seam and popping them into your mouth?
Oh yes, I was eating on the way to school, having my little snack of rhubarb and green peas and whatever happened to be growing in everybody's yards.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really delightful to grow up there. It was really pristine and beautiful. And I think that feeling of being connected to the generations that came before really came from my grandmother and also from my father. Kind of, it's my grandfather and father who tended to favor me and who favors Renee in the book as well, but really gave her that connection to the land and to the people who'd settled it, and to the fact that they had been a part of that. Mm-hmm. And that was important and kind of gave it gives you a certain chain to follow. Yeah, that's nice.
Well, when you talk about settlers on the land, you also juxtapose that a little bit with the people who were native to that land. And that, the issues of the reservations and the Native Americans in that area comes through in the narrative. You find out that some of the family don't have the nicest impressions of the people who are on the reservations there. I'm thinking specifically of when Eve and Al go to do business on the reservation because he is a cattle trader. Right. Why did you choose to write about that, and why was that important for you to write about that?
Well, that's really important to me, and it comes back to the same kinds of things we were talking about earlier. I mean, this is a country built on these kinds of violences, and this is a racist family. This is a racist family, and racist not in an overt way, but this is the kind of racist family that many of us are so familiar with, where it kind of comes in the language. It comes in the violence of the language and the violence of the ideologies that come through the language. And I think that's so important because I think we don't remember who we are a lot of times. We kind of think we've come here very purely, and we have not.
Right.
We have not.
And there is this narrative in the family that the Native Americans don't respect how hard the settlers had to work when they came and took over their land, so that you do expose kind of that racism that's inherent in that place.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is that tension, this is we're talking, I suppose, about a resource that's, the land. Everybody wanted to own the same land. And so you have the settlers, and they're feeling like, this is my land, I want it, and this is Native American land, traditional Native American land. So it's a very big tension there.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me a little bit at this point about your process. How did you begin once your husband, the archivist, brought up your old manuscripts and you decided, nope, I'm starting it from scratch? How did this unfold for you?
Well, I hadn't been reading any fiction, actually, for about 10 years. There were about 10 years in my life where I didn't even read any fiction, and I didn't write any fiction. I wrote some poetry because I wanted to stay in touch with language. But I was very busy raising children. I had my own family that I needed to figure out, not having come from a family that I wanted to duplicate. I had to figure out how to be part of that family. And so I turned to a spiritual practice for me that became very important in my life. My husband and I both practiced a form of Tibetan Buddhism that, we still try to stay in touch with. We've been more serious about it in the past than we are now, but this is something that's deeply important to both of us. And so for about 10 years, that was really my focus. I read only Buddhist texts. I did Buddhist practice, but that's all I did. And then we ended up living in a community in upstate New York where there are a bunch of Tibetan children, a group of Tibetan children being home educated within this community, this Tibetan community. And I was asked to teach English. And so I was really excited, and it was so fun. I had such a great time doing it. I was teaching about 3 young girls, 13, 14 years old, and we were reading Little House on the Prairie. Aww. And as we were reading Little House on the Prairie, I thought, hey, wait a minute. I was supposed to be doing something like that. You know, like, hey, I remember.
This sounds familiar.
This is something I was supposed to be, looking into for myself. And so at the same time, this is a long story, I hope you don't mind.
No, I love it. Go ahead.
At the same time, I had a friend from college named Claire Shipman who wrote an article for The Atlantic called The Confidence Gap. So she was being interviewed on NPR, and I was driving to get groceries in town, and I heard her being interviewed, and she was talking about the idea that men will go into an interview without having the skills that are listed as necessary because they feel confident enough to say, okay, this is fine. If there are skills I don't have, I can get them on the job. Whereas women feel like they have to have absolutely mastered each of the things on the list before they can go in and even apply for the job. It was so fascinating, I thought. And so then she said that what really needed to happen is that women needed to overcorrect for confidence. And that really rung a bell for me. I thought, overcorrect for confidence. It doesn't mean correct for confidence. You have to overdo it. Because a guy will leave a day of writing and go, wow, I did such a great job. I'm really making progress. Right? And women leave a day of working and they're like, oh my God, this is going so badly. I'll never finish it. It's going nowhere. So, this is kind of one of the things that I really was looking at that point. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try, and I'm just going to start somewhere. I think my first sentence was something like, of course this isn't in the book, thank God, but the first sentence was something like, I was born on a da-da-da, I just start at the beginning, let's see what we can get to. And every day I left my office thinking, okay, I did it, I can feel good about it, and whatever's wrong, I can come back and look at it again, and I can try to fix it. But I can guide myself through this and not have to be perfect. I can overcorrect for confidence. And I really tried to do that, and I just kept going and going and going and going. And it became wonderful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really wonderful.
Well, I have met some writers and hung out with some writers before, and I have people who are close to me who are writers, and I have studied with people who are writers, but when you have a partner who is a lauded writer and you have studied with Tobias Wolff and Toni Morrison and all of these other people who are, obviously their names will remain part of our literary canon, is it hard to overcorrect for confidence? It is a little bit, I think sometimes when I read your work or someone else's work, I feel like, why? Why would I even bother trying to put words to a page? Do you ever get intimidated when you read someone else's work? I know you were the first reader for George Saunders, so...
Well, George has his own thing,
Yeah?
George really has his own thing, and he really approaches it in his own way, and I, am his first fan.
Yeah.
And always have been, I just think he's a fabulous writer and makes an incredible contribution to literature. But I also have my own thing. Mm-hmm. I kind of really, I don't have any, I don't have any feeling that he's smarter than me.
Amen.
I really don't. And, that's a day-to-day thing. We've been married 30-some years, and, we have a really nice, equal relationship, and, I feel like I have my own voice to contribute, and I hope, that can contribute in a positive way and in a way that's meaningful for people who read it. And so I don't have that thing with him. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I really, I adore what he does, and he's a wonderful guy. So
Right. And do you have a group of peers or mentors who also read? Do you have a writing group that you work with?
I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't. I really work on my own, and George will read for me, or sometimes if I'm feeling like having fun with reading, I'll read aloud something to him I did that day, and and then I'll think, oh my God, I really have to go back to that. And but it's just I don't have a reading group, but Toni Morrison does read for me. She was really helpful with this book. She gave me the kernel of information that I really needed to finish it and make it work for me, and make it work, I hope, for other people too. But she's a reader for me, and Tobias Wolff read it for me too and gave me some very wonderful pieces of advice. But I have some wonderful readers. I'm very lucky that way.
Are you reading fiction again now?
I am.
And what do you like to read?
I'm actually kind of playing catch up a little bit. Yeah, so I've been going back, I've been reading Willa Cather and some of her kind of, I would call them like deeper works, deeper cut kind of works, like Lucy Gayheart probably isn't deeper for other people, but for me.
Yeah.
And The Song of the Lark. And I am astonished by how perfect like her language is, and the beauty of her stories for a young woman on the plains who wants to move forward into some kind of artistic life. I love it. So I'm really reading her. I've been reading Elena Ferrante, who I really felt gave me permission to write this book, because she dwelled so unapologetically in the day-to-day dark grind of relationship. And I felt that gave me permission to move ahead with the things I wanted to do. And there are others. Jean Rhys is someone who I absolutely adore, and I'm really hoping that, someday something I write can move like the way she writes it. She's just amazing. So, and many. Michael Cunningham, The Hours, is just a book that stunned me so tremendously that on the last page, I was at home all by myself, sitting at the kitchen table, and I got to the last page and I just went, and like tears started just streaming down my face. It was really a really moving book. So there are so many.
Well, he seems to like you pretty well, too.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
I was just looking at this because I love the art and how they did the two columns of the blurbs on the back of the book, too. So how do you feel about the whole business of publishing and being, now that you're a debut novelist and you've kind of gone through the whole book? This is the end of your book tour, the last event I saw on your website. Yeah,
this is kind of the end. We're going to Savannah to do a festival. I'm going to Australia.
Right, in February,
in Australia to do the festival there, and I was just invited to Ireland, but I don't think I'll be able to go there. So there are different things. I have mixed feelings about it, actually. Mm-hmm. I have mixed feelings. It's been an incredible process, and I have to say, I have to do this. There's someone here tonight, actually, who helped me so much in the final editing of this book. And I would send her like 4 or 5 different versions of the same sentence, and she would always write me back like, this one, no, this one, this one. And I would go, okay, but what about this one and this one? Okay, well, this one's better. No, this one's better. Well, what about this? We did that for months. So she is my very best line editor, and I have to say thank you to my daughter, Elena.
Aww.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's an awesome editor. And, so I couldn't have done it without her. But what I wanted to say overall is this has been an incredibly beautiful process and a really great learning experience for me, because it's been a group process. And I never understood that a book was like that. I finished my part. Then it went to the editor, and the editor gave me suggestions, and I finished it again. And then it went to the copy editor, and then it was like on. It was on. Like, I had so much to do, and I worked so hard, and it went back to the proofreader and the copy editor and the proofreader and the copy, many, many times, and then the art department and the whole thing. And it's a group project, and it was wonderful to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the other side of it, this has two sides, if you don't mind me going on.
Please.
This has two sides, because the other side of that is that I'm kind of struggling a little bit with what I see in myself about this book. So I have a lot to work on in terms of, I really want this book to be successful. So I have to be careful of myself to not kind of go back to your other question and become jealous of other writers who are having bigger success. That to me is a big deal. This is we're not all put on the planet to do something specific. What I'm saying is, I wasn't put here to write a book. I was put here to be a human being.
Yeah.
So that has to be
You've already had about 5 or 6 different careers, right?
Yeah.
We've all done that, though.
So this is something that's really important to me, and really kind of integral to this process, and integral then again to my spiritual life, and to moving forward with maybe trying to write another book.
When I went back and listened to this interview, I was surprised to hear Paula say that she didn't consider herself the most imaginative writer. While she may not be world building and delivering the mother of dragons, she totally nails mothers and daughters and mothers and sons. I know we're all caught up in the end of school year award season, senior nights, graduations, soccer team ceremonies, but we have some amazing book events happening here in Atlanta. Treat yourself to a proper night of adult beverages and conversation. We have more than 14 different author events to choose from this week alone, and it all starts tomorrow night with my live interview of Tony Horwitz. That's happening tomorrow at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library. Horwitz is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author I came to know when I studied his best-selling book, Confederates in the Attic, in grad school. He's back with another book about the American South. This time, he's retracing the steps of renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, who wrote about the South on the eve of Civil War. Horwitz's new work of nonfiction is entitled Spying on the South. Please join us tomorrow at 7 at the Carter Library. Tuesday brings a dynamite combo. 2 New York Times and internationally best-selling authors of psychological thrillers. Atlanta's Karen Slaughter will be in conversation with Alifair Burke, who is touring with her new book, The Better Sister. The Georgia Center for the Book is hosting this event at Holy Trinity Parish in Decatur. It's free and open to the public. Karis Books will have copies of these authors' books for sale. On Thursday, May 23rd, Little Shop of Stories welcomes YA author Claire Legrand. Legrand will be in town to promote the sequel to her best-selling book, Furyborn. This is well known to those of you who are YA and fantasy lovers. The second installment in the trilogy is entitled Kingsbane, and Little Shop has a special pre-order campaign that includes plenty of great fantasy swag, so check that out. Friday night's all right for a different take on Appalachia. There's even debate over how to pronounce that A there. Chuck Reese of The Bitter Southerner is an outspoken critic of the book Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and he'll be in good company with the editors of a new book called Appalachian Reckoning, a region responds to Hillbilly Elegy. That should be a lively conversation this Friday, May 24th. And speaking of The Bitter Southerner, Kyle and Chuck were nice enough to invite me back to participate in their annual summer reading roundup. Our list of some of the best Southern books comes out this Tuesday, May 21st. Look for it on the Bitter Southerners website, and we'll link to it from our website at literaryatlanta.com. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website. That's literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast. Apple Podcast, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.